what's fun about this is that this is also going to be the backstory of Alpine Parrot, which is my company. As was mentioned before, Alpine Parrot is an outdoor apparel company specifically for plus size women. I left tech to start a pants company, but before I could do that, I had to make a really great pair of pants for myself. And so this is that story of how I made these pants. And I'm going to just sprinkle lots and lots of software engineering analogies all throughout this. So I hope you enjoy it. Okay, so let's get started by first comparing code and pants, right? Like, what do these two things have in common? And feel free to just like throw things into Discord. I can't see it, but this is going to be fun. And let's be silly, right? Like, there are things that these two have in common that are really obvious, like they both have loops. They both have shorts. We, as engineers, will often hem and haw at the length of the functions. They are both functional. And my personal punny favorite is they both have lint. But more importantly, they also are both full of craftsmanship, right? We really put our heart and souls into the things that we make. And fortunately for me, for this talk, they both use the same product development process. So let's get started. Let's go ahead and let's make a pair of pants. So before we can do anything else, we need to start with a product spec, right? This is how we need to understand who our customer is, why they have a problem, and what are we going to do to solve it. So let's do that now. Our customer is, well, it's me, and I'm Raquel, and I'm an engineer by trade. I like to hike, I like to ski and climb. I'm based in the Bay Area, but I also spend a lot of time in the woods. And this is great, this is fantastic. But I have a problem, and that problem is that it's really hard for me to find pants that fit, especially hiking pants. And for me particularly, I find that when I buy pants, they're either tight in the hips and big in the waist, or really big in the hips, or perfectly fitted in the hips, but then really big in the waist. And it's just unbearable. And so what happens is, instead of actually taking a hike to the summit, I end up hiking up my pants the whole time, right? Like, I'm just like sitting there going, ugh. And that completely detracts from the experience. So what I want to do instead is I'm going to make a pair of hiking pants, right? And there are a couple of ways that we can do this, and I'll get into that in a minute. But some of you might be thinking, well, why don't you just go shopping, right? Like, just go shopping and then find the perfect pair of pants. Well, the problem is that doesn't quite work for me, and it doesn't quite work for a lot of folks. And frankly, I got tired of going to store after store after store and finding pants that didn't quite fit. And I'll explain a little bit about why that is in just a second. So we have our proposed solution. So what happens next? Well, we need to understand, what does success look like, right? And so we need to define our success. Number one, I want it to be adjustable in the waist. Like I mentioned, I've got a bigger hips and a smaller waist, but some days maybe I have a big lunch and I want it to be easy to adjust, right? And that's important to me. I also want it to be roomy enough for lots of bending, because when you're hiking, you're going to be scrambling over some rocks. You might be, going over fallen trees, whatever. Like, you need to move. And then, I can't believe I'm saying this, it's 2020, but for crying out loud, my pants need to have pockets, and they need to be big enough to actually fit my phone. I know this is outrageous for me to even be saying it, but this is where we are at. So these are the success criteria. Let's step back for a second. I promised you I'd explain why pants are so tricky. And so here we go. Everybody on this planet has trouble finding clothes that fit well. Now, unless you have a bespoke tailor, what I'm talking about specifically is finding clothes that fit well from your various brands. And the reason this happens is because every single human is shaped a little bit differently. We all have stuff in different places, and that's what makes us beautiful, right? And while the apparel industry does genuinely try to make clothes that fit most folks, because that's how they make their money, the fact of the matter is that they don't quite hit it on the money every single time. And here's why. So every designer has a vision of who their ideal person wearing their clothes is. And what they do is they find somebody who is that size and they make them into what is called a fit model. And this person is going to be kind of like the medium of their size range. And they make a pattern that fits them perfectly. And then because it's mass manufacturing, they have to find a way to make clothes for everybody else, preferably without finding a brand new fit model. So what they do is they algorithmically update the pattern for everyone else. This means that they break up the pattern and they spread it out to make larger sizes. And then they overlap those same pieces to make the smaller sizes. And this is a process called grading. Now, every single brand has a different fit model and they have different grade rules. The grade rules are the amount by which you might spread or overlap. And what this results in is even though you have a single size across multiple different brands, they could all be different measurements. So when you go to a store and you found that perfect pair of pants and you're like, okay, I'm a size 14 in this pair. And then you go to another store and you're like, the size 14 doesn't fit. Why is that? Well, this is why. And a 2-inch or 5-centimeter variation might not seem like a lot kind of like in your head, but remember, this is a circumference difference, not a linear difference. So that makes it really, really difficult. And as a result, really none of us have a chance of really finding perfect clothes that fit us every single time in the mass market. So all of that explained, let's go ahead and make some pants. So we figured out the who, the why, the what, and now we're going to talk about the how. And that's where our tech spec comes in. I want you to think about your pattern, the clothing pattern, as like your code. We're going to write code. We're going to make patterns. And we can do this in one of two ways. We can either take a pattern that already exists and modify it, right? Just like finding someone else's code and then importing it as a module into your own site or something and then tweaking it. Or we can create the pattern from scratch. We can write this code from nothing and figure out what kind of works, what doesn't. And there are pros and cons to both. There are always going to be trade-offs no matter which you choose. On the one hand, if you take something that already exists, there's probably a community behind it, but it's also made like for some generic human, aka not you, which means you're going to have to tweak it. On the other hand, if you make your own pattern, then you can get exactly what you want, but it also requires some level of skill, and as a result, a whole lot of tweaking because you don't exactly know what the end result is supposed to be until you actually start playing around with it. So for the purposes of this exercise, I went ahead and decided to create the pattern from scratch. I've been doing pattern making for a little while now, so I have enough skill that I know that I could be dangerous. And, you know, let's give it a go. Let's see what happens. So to make this pattern, we need to start with some measurements, right? It's funny because when you think about men's, women's, children's clothing, and I want to be really clear, those are literally the 3 buckets of clothing that the apparel industry has. This is not about gender. And like women's pants, women's clothing, it's like one size, right? Like I'm a size 16 or a size 12 or a size 4 or a size 28. And that's it. That's the only number you have to try to figure out if something fits. Men's clothing is a little bit more, it's a little bit nicer in that you get 2 measurements, right? It's like I'm a 36 by 30 or something. And that's a little bit better, but in reality, I took 14 measurements to make my pants, 14. Anyway, so then I added ease, and ease is the amount of room that you need for your body to be, you know, just moving. When you, like, if you only think about the explicit measurements when you're standing still and you only make clothes for that, then you'll only be able to stand still in your clothes. You need to have some ease to be able to move around in them. And then when you take all this, put it together, and you can draft it onto paper. Now, you can draft it on paper specifically or digitally, and I've actually moved from paper to digital. But this is what a pattern looks like for pants. You can kind of sense where the legs are. The outer bits are the hips. The inner bits, that's like your crotch area. And so I've made these patterns, And this was the first round, right? And now it's time for like a hello world, right? Like I've just gone ahead and made the first round, copied, pasted, did whatever, made some measurement changes, started with something, and now let's go ahead and run it, right? Like, let's see what happens. So for our first prototype, I want to follow prototyping basics, right? It needs to be something that I can easily throw away. It needs to be something that I can make very quickly and then make very quickly again. It needs to be cheap, and it needs to be, it better not have anything fancy on it, because I just want to continuously iterate. I'm going to start off with some really cheap fabric called muslin. It's just really basic cotton woven. It's like $4 a yard, cheaper if you buy it in bulk. And you'll see it. It's not flattering, but it gets the job done, at least to be able to quickly iterate. What does this look like in fabric? Well, or in apparel, it means we cut the pattern pieces based off of that original pattern, sew the pieces together, fit the garment to me, and then based off of what I see, modify the pattern, and then rinse and repeat. Okay, so I also want to do test-driven development here. What does this mean in the apparel world? Well, in the software world, test-driven development means we start with tests and then we modify our code to ensure that the tests pass, right? Like, ideally, the tests just stay as they are. You write them once and never touch them again, unless you have like new requirements and things like that. In the apparel world, the pattern is your code, so your body is your test suite. And I want to make a really important emphasis here. The tests are always perfect. Your body is perfect right now, just the way it is. And so when we apply our pattern to the body, that means that, like, that's our test suite. So when there are bugs, it means that there's something wrong with the pattern. Culturally, everyone wants to, like, we are taught to believe that when clothes don't fit us, that there's something wrong with us and we need to change our body in order to fit the clothing. And that could not be further from the truth. The reality is your body is perfect. When clothes don't fit, it's the clothes that are wrong. Okay, now that we have that settled, I'm now going to show you what a failing test suite looks like. But I must warn you, once you see what failing tests on a body look like in clothing, you will never be able to unsee them ever again. And I kind of apologize, but not really. So this is what failing tests look like. This is the first prototype. And just looking at them off the bat, maybe it looks okay, but for me, I now have a trained eye. I can see that there are definitely some issues here. First of all, number one, there's definitely just too much fabric right at the crotch, and that's going to make movement really difficult. Number two, you can see that the upper hips are kind of indented. That's because it's just a little too tight there. And then number three, the back waistline is just a little too tall. And so we need to bring that down. So what does that look like when we take those changes and we apply it back to our pattern, or bring it back to master? Well, now we can go in and we can lower the crotch points and take out a little bit of fabric in the crotch. We can add a little bit more room into the hips, and we can lower the center back seam to kind of accommodate all of those things. And so this is what that looks like. So we'll apply it to another prototype. I should note that I think I made something like 15 prototypes before I got to where I really love my pants. Spoiler alert. But I'm only going to show you 2 prototypes today because we don't have that kind of time. But this is prototype number 2. It fits way better, right? It looks so much better. However, and this is something really interesting, you can see the wrinkles. And this is where the failing test, like, that's where you really start to see things. The wrinkles are our stack traces. This is how we know where there are errors. The wrinkles will actually point to where there are issues. So for example, in the crotch, I can see that there's still too much room, or there's still too much fabric in there. And then it's actually kind of getting pulled down in the middle of the crotch. So I need to kind of do some changes in there again. And then up on the top, you can see the hips are also still a little bit too tight. The wrinkles are pointing right at the hips. They're like, yo, there's too much tightness here. Now, if you don't know what all of these things mean, that's okay. There's documentation, there are resources out there to help you understand what to do and when and how. And my favorite one is actually this one, because it shows you the wrinkles and then it shows you exactly what to do to the pattern to make those changes. I like to think of these as like my Stack Overflow for pattern drafting. What's really nice is that you can actually make the modifications to the pattern live in real time. It's just like having in your dev environment, and you're like, you know, I'm going to try changing the color of the CSS element for this, or I'm going to try something else in JavaScript here, blah, 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 which is really cool because you can kind of play around, see what works, what doesn't work, and then you can bring it back to your pattern once you know that it's good. So do a bunch of prototypes, fantastic. Now let's move on to staging. And when I talk about staging, what I mean here is that I'm going to try a different environment, right? Just like when you push to staging, it's a slightly different dev environment or working environment. And so in this case, I'm going to use different fabric. And so what you'll see is that there are certain things that have come back and there are new issues that have suddenly shown up, because even though it didn't look like an issue in the muslin, which was the cheap fabric from before, now because it's a different fabric, it's going to behave in a different way. And so here we've got some weirdness in the crotch again, and then we've got some stuff in the hips, and then there's some weird funky thing going on right in the center back seam. But that's, you know, that's fine. We're just going to continue to iterate. I want to point out that the wrinkles are like our unit tests, but then we also need to have integration tests, right? And so an integration test is how we ensure that the entire system as a whole continues to perform despite any changes that we make to the like individual lines of code. And in this particular case, what you'll see is that I cannot for the life of me lift up my leg, which is a bit of an issue when you want to go hiking. So this whole thing does not pass integration. So on to round 2 of staging. So this time I'm going to change the fabric again, and I'm going to use something with stretch. I've gone ahead and added a few design details because now that we're in staging, I want to prepare for production, all that good stuff. Again, still not a perfect fit, and you can start to see some of these wrinkles, but it's looking better. And I want to show you a passing integration test because, as you can see, I'm in the outdoors and I can actually lift up my legs. It's not a perfect video. I was by myself, whatever. But yay, tests pass. So a few more iterations, etc., and we get to a point where it's like, no more blockers. Let's go to production. This is fantastic. So this is actually where I'm at right now. And I only just released these photos earlier last week. And if you want to get other sneak peeks, definitely join the newsletter or subscribe to the newsletter on alpineparrot.co. But these are the pants. This is where we're at right now. These are still technically a prototype, but I'm really excited because these fit me really well. And I'm really proud of these. Are they perfect? No, but they're ready to go. And I'm going to actually start my own grading process to start making other sizes. And I should have those in the next few weeks and start putting them on some fit testers, which is super, super exciting. Also, you'll notice there are pockets and they're perfectly sized. They can all fit a cell phone. Now, made the product, we've made the product spec, the tech spec, made a bunch of prototypes. We've shipped to staging, we've shipped to production, and now we are not yet finished with our entire process where we must have a retrospective. And it's important to know what went well, what could have gone better, and what are we going to do differently next time. And so here are a few things that I've kind of learned along the way that I either need to get better at or I'm really glad that I've already done. So the first one is version control. If I could have a GitHub for pattern drafting, I would pay so much money for this because there's just so many changes that have to happen every single time I make a new draft. And so you'll see I've tried the colors. I actually have started using Semver in some written notes. I have like a whole written thing, and that's great, but I really wish I had something more, and I'll just kind of keep iterating on that myself, I guess. I also find that I need to be doing more frequent commits. I'll often do those kind of like live in my dev environment changes, and then I'll put something down and go do something else. And then I have no idea what I did. So I need to be a little bit better about taking things back to master and understanding what changes I made and when. I'm very happy to say that I did have backups. This is an over dramatization of a photo, but this little dog right here definitely did take one of my pattern pieces and shoot it up. And fortunately I had a backup and was able to salvage everything. But you know, these things happen and it's important to have backups. And finally, it took me a while to understand the importance of having other people who could look at my patterns and look at the fitting photos to be able to get the feedback that I needed to learn how to fit pants properly. Having resources in the form of books is really great, but it took me way more iterations than it necessarily should have to be able to get to the pants that I have now. In industry, apparently you get 3 prototypes before you have to go to production. And I think I mentioned I had something like 15 prototypes before I got to my final pants. So I think these are just like really great and useful things. All in all, was this a success? And I think absolutely, right? It's fitted in the waist. You can see the little adjustable belt. And then it's roomy enough for lots of bending. And the pockets are there and they are present and they're amazing. So all that said, this was a super fun talk. Thanks, Raquel. I learned a lot about pants. What am I supposed to take away from this other than no clothes will ever fit me ever? Well, the reality is, I think that it's really important for us to take the things that we do every single day and look at it from a different angle, right? If you write code every day, if you're a software engineer, which I think a lot of folks here are, think about it from a different perspective. We are craftspeople. Whatever it is that you do every day, you are putting your heart and soul, you're putting a level of craftsmanship into the work that you do. And software is a craft. Engineering, in my mind, is much more of an art than it is a science. And so it's important for us to take these things that we do every single day and then apply it to something else. Because in the process of doing different things and trying and failing and making mistakes and making things better, that is engineering in and of itself. And then we can take those things that we have learned and bring it back to the thing that we do all the time. Being a software engineer has made me better at making pants. Making pants has made me better as a software engineer. And so when you can do that over and over and over again, you really level up. And I think that is something that is often overlooked when we, keep trying to be better and get promotions and all of those things. So all that said, thank you so much. If you want to see more about the process by which I made these hiking pants, you can check out a blog series that I wrote called The Year of the Pants, and I'll put this link into the Discord. You can also check out Alpine Parrot at alpineparrot.co. Sign up for the newsletter, get sneak peeks. I'm on all of the social medias. And yeah, thank you so much. This was super fun. I am happy to take any and all questions. Thank you.